Sibutu Passage, Sulu Sea. June 9, 1944. The sea was black glass under a half-moon. No stars. Only the pulse of engines deep below, muffled and patient. At 02:35, a thin periscope slit the surface, a single ripple vanishing in seconds. Beneath it, steel and silence. The submarine USS Harder, Balau class, 76 meters of pressure-hardened alloy and human nerve, hunted alone in enemy waters. Inside, the air was heavy with diesel and sweat. Every man knew his station by muscle memory, a whisper through the control room. Bearing mark. Range 4,000? Closing. Dealey stood at the periscope, his voice calm, almost gentle, the way surgeons speak before the cut. He'd done this too many times to count, yet each engagement felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Through green glass, a silhouette appeared. A Japanese destroyer cutting fast across the moon's reflection. Its searchlights swept like angry knives. Every 30 seconds, sonar pings echoed through the hull. The crew froze. They listened to their own heartbeat. Dealey didn't blink. Stand by. Fire one! The tube hissed. Compressed air thundered, then vanished into the ocean's vast indifference. 30 seconds. 20. 10. A dull, rising rumble. Then white flame erupted across the destroyer's bow. The concussion rolled over Harder's hull. Men exhaled, gripping steel rails, eyes wide. Above them, a destroyer broke apart, one of 5 that would fall in the next 4 days. Below, the submarine turned silently into the dark, the commander already plotting his next strike. For 4 nights in June, one U.S. submarine rewrote the book on undersea warfare, and Japan's Navy could scarcely believe what had happened. By mid-1944, the Pacific Ocean had become the largest battlefield on Earth. From the Marianas to New Guinea, the United States had seized momentum once thought impossible. Yet beneath that triumph, a quieter, deadlier campaign raged, one fought not by fleets on open horizons, but by men who vanished beneath them. The Undersea War. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. submarine service was small, under-resourced, and plagued with technical flaws. The early years were humiliating. Torpedoes ran too deep or failed to detonate. Commanders were cautious, often ordered to conserve ordnance. Dozens of attacks ended with nothing but trails of bubbles and broken nerves. By 1943, the Bureau of Ordnance finally admitted the truth. The Mark 14 torpedo and its magnetic exploder were defective. Field fixes poured in from Fremantle and Pearl Harbor. Crews learned to trust their instincts instead of the manuals. They rewired firing circuits, recalibrated gyros, and removed the magnetic pistols altogether. Those corrections transformed the submarine force. In less than a year, the undersea fleet turned into the U.S. Navy's most lethal branch, accounting for over half of Japan's merchant tonnage losses, with less than 2% of naval manpower. Japan's shrinking empire across the Pacific. Japan's logistical arteries were collapsing. The once endless convoys of fuel, rice, and ammunition that fed its empire now traveled through gauntlets of American submarines. Each tanker sunk meant fewer aircraft launched, fewer destroyers fueled, fewer hopes of recovery. By early summer 1944, the Imperial Navy's high command faced a dilemma. The massive mobile fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, was preparing to defend the Philippines and the Marianas. But its ships needed protection while they refueled and regrouped. And destroyers, the shield of the fleet, were in dangerously short supply. They gathered at Tawi-Tawi, a cluster of palm-lined islands in the Sulu Sea. It was a tranquil lagoon turned fortress, chosen for its natural anchorage and its proximity to Borneo's oil. More than a dozen destroyers rotated through the narrow channels there, running escort drills, fueling tankers, screening carriers. The Americans knew it. Fremantle's intelligence division, fed by decrypted signals and aerial reconnaissance, mapped every approach, and one passage, threading between Sibutu Island and the North Borneo coast, became a magnet for submariners. The Sibutu Passage, shallow, narrow, and unavoidable for ships leaving Tawi-Tawi. USS Harder. The Hunter into that corridor steamed the USS Harder, SS-257, Balau class, newly refitted, crewed by 72 men, commanded by Commander Samuel David Dealey. Dealey was not loud or theatrical. Crewmates described him as quiet, courteous, almost reserved, until battle stations sounded. Then his decisions came in crisp, low sentences that carried absolute authority. He had earned his nickname, the Destroyer Killer, by doing the unthinkable, attacking destroyers head-on, down the throat, where any miscalculation meant death. Harder's previous 4 patrols had already produced a reputation that rippled through both navies. She had sunk troop transports, gunboats, and freighters across the Java Sea and Celebes. Her crew worked with the rhythm of a single organism. Lookouts trusting sonar, torpedomen trusting the con. By late May 1944, Dealey and his men sailed from Fremantle on their 5th patrol, ordered to coordinate with 2 other subs, Redfin and Creval, and to patrol the waters off Tawi-Tawi. Officially, the objective was reconnaissance. Unofficially, every submarine skipper knew any Japanese warship leaving that anchorage must not reach open sea. The ocean's geometry, the Sulu Sea, was deceptive. Beautiful from above, lethal below. Depths fluctuated wildly, 200 feet in some channels, 1,000 in others. Coral ridges, shifting currents, and sandbanks made sonar erratic. A submarine diving too deep risked striking the bottom. Rising too high meant radar detection or aerial attack. Each patrol day was a calculation of risk. The Harder's crew endured air temperatures over 100 degrees inside the hull. Condensation dripped from bulkheads, mixing with diesel fumes and sweat. Every few hours, the smell of ozone from electrical panels cut through the staleness. Yet discipline never faltered. Dealey's log entries were terse, unemotional, but behind them lay constant tension. Sighted smoke bearing EU-92. Dive to 90 feet. Sonar reports fast screws. Probable destroyer. Attack number 5. Results excellent. Each line marked another decision between visibility and survival. Intelligence and intent in. The weeks before the mission, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, emphasized aggressiveness. He trusted Dealey to act independently without constant orders from headquarters. The U.S. Navy strategy was now total interdiction. Choke every route feeding Japan's front line. Meanwhile, at Tawi-Tawi, Japanese destroyer divisions practiced anti-submarine tactics under Rear Admiral Nobue Morimoto. Their sonar equipment was improving, but doctrine still favored aggression over precision. Charge the contact, drop depth charges in patterns, and rely on luck. It worked sometimes, but it also made destroyers easy targets for a patient submarine. By early June, the pressure on both sides was immense. The Imperial Navy was preparing to move its carriers toward the Philippine Sea for the decisive showdown later known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Any disruption to its screening, destroyers would cripple that plan. The Americans didn't know exactly when Ozawa's fleet would sortie, but Fremantle believed that striking Tawi-Tawi's lifeline could delay the Japanese timetable. The Harder, operating on minimal communication, was the spear point of that gamble. As the days passed, Dealey's submarine slipped through shipping lanes, radar mast barely above water, engines alternating between diesel and electric to stay silent. Lookouts counted phosphorescent wakes. Sonar men tracked propeller beats echoing off island cliffs. Each contact grew closer, each bearing line steadier. Then, just before dawn on June 6th, the radar picked up fast-moving pips, Japanese destroyers sweeping south from Tawi-Tawi, unaware they were already inside Harder's sights. The stage for the 96-hour rampage was set. The assignment: the Harder left Fremantle in late May 1944, cutting across the Java Sea toward Borneo. It was the 5th time Commander Samuel Dealey had taken her into enemy waters. His orders were direct but flexible. Patrol off Tawi-Tawi, reconnoiter Japanese fleet activity, and strike any target of opportunity. In coded dispatches, Admiral Charles Lockwood stressed the value of audacious initiative. By now, the submarine force had evolved from cautious scouts to independent hunters. Every skipper was trusted to read the sea and act without waiting for permission. Dealey, known for his calm ruthlessness, embodied that new doctrine. He carried a map annotated in his own hand, narrow channels, reef edges, and sonar dead zones marked in pencil. One margin read simply, Sibutu, tight but promising. The Japanese picture. At Tawi-Tawi, the Japanese mobile fleet floated in deceptive serenity. Palm trees hid oil tanks. Carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Taiho lay at anchor, guarded by destroyers of the Second Fleet. The heat shimmered over decks. Crewmen practiced anti-submarine drills beneath the glare of tropical sun. But beneath that order was exhaustion. Months of operations had drained fuel reserves. The destroyers, sleek, fast, deadly, were burning irreplaceable oil to keep watch. Mechanical wear, tropical humidity, and constant alerts took their toll. Rear Admiral Takeo Kurita's staff noted in reports that submarine interference is increasing. They knew enemy submarines lurked near the approaches. Still, they underestimated how close and how daring one of them would come. The Harder, at that very moment, was threading its way north through the Sibutu Passage, the same corridor every destroyer had to use to exit the anchorage. The passage itself. Sibutu Passage is a deceptive cut in the Earth's crust, a narrow throat between the southern tip of the Philippines and the northern edge of Borneo. Depths vary between 300 and 700 feet, hemmed by coral shoals that make maneuvering treacherous. For a submarine, it's both an opportunity and a trap. The channel's depth allowed a skilled commander to slip below destroyer sonar beams, yet any misjudged dive could slam the keel against coral ridges. Dealey studied the charts again and again. He preferred risk to routine. If we are to do damage, he told his officers, we must strike where they think we won't. So he brought the Harder to periscope depth during daylight, using the jagged silhouette of islands to mask his presence. Radar watch continued through the night. Every transmission was minimized to reduce interception. Inside the submarine life aboard Harder followed a rhythm of fatigue and alertness. There were no day or night, only watches, meals, and alarms. Crewmen slept in narrow bunks stacked 3 high, the air heavy with moisture. Bread spoiled within days. Coffee and cigarettes became currency. When battle stations sounded, every man moved without hesitation. Torpedomen swung breech doors shut. Lookouts adjusted optical rangefinders, and sonar operators fine-tuned their dials. Each knew that the difference between survival and destruction was measured in seconds. Dealey's demeanor never changed. He rarely raised his voice. His executive officer later recalled, "The old man could make you believe everything was under control, even when you knew it wasn't." The crew believed him implicitly. That trust would be tested again and again in the days ahead. The pattern of war. By early June, radio intercepts from Fremantle indicated that Japan's mobile fleet would soon depart Tawi-Tawi for the Philippine Sea. Every destroyer guarding that fleet was crucial. If Dealey could thin that screen, it would ripple across the entire Pacific campaign. The logic was brutal but effective. Every escort sunk meant another carrier exposed, another convoy delayed. Harder's radar detected its first destroyer column on the night of June 6th. The targets were moving fast, their signatures distinct from merchant ships, sharp, consistent pulses, tight formation. Dealey tracked them silently, adjusting course to parallel their line of advance. His crew maintained ultra-quiet. No unnecessary movement, no dropped tools, even whispered commands subdued. When the radar operator confirmed contact at less than 8,000 yards, Dealey murmured the words that electrified the control room. "They're destroyers. We'll go in." He knew exactly what that meant. Destroyers were submarine killers. Engaging them head-on was considered near suicidal, but Dealey believed in exploiting their overconfidence. Destroyers expected subs to flee, not to charge directly into their wakes. The evolution of the killer Dealey's tactics came from experience, not recklessness. During earlier patrols in the Sulu Sea, he'd noticed that Japanese destroyers, once detecting a sonar echo, often ran straight at the contact at high speed, dropping depth charges on instinct. That pattern created a blind spot, a moment when the destroyer closed the distance too quickly to turn or evade. By firing torpedoes down the throat during that rush, a skilled skipper could turn the hunter into prey. It demanded flawless timing and nerves of steel. Dealey had perfected it. His gunnery officer described it as knife fighting underwater, strategy converging. At the same time, events far beyond the Sulu Sea were aligning. Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet was preparing for the Marianas Offensive, a massive strike that would draw Japan's carriers out. Every move in the Sulu Sea, every ship sunk, would affect those plans. In this intricate chess game, Harder was a single piece, but one moving at the right place, at the right time, could collapse the entire defense. The ocean that June was filled with unseen motion, aircraft scouting from Palau, supply ships hugging coastlines, submarines from both sides threading invisible lines. Each commander worked with partial information, driven by intuition and fragments of code. The final calm by dawn on June 7, 1944, Harder held position south of Tawi Tawi. The sea was flat, the air still. Crewmen stared through periscope lenses at distant wakes, unaware that in less than 48 hours they would face 5 destroyers and a barrage of over 300 depth charges. The submarine drifted silently in the deep, batteries charged, tubes loaded, men waiting, up above. Japanese destroyers were forming into escort groups, preparing to steam through the same narrow passage. They had orders to hunt submarines. They did not know the hunter was already waiting for them. And in those tense, breathless hours before the first torpedo fired, both sides were moving toward an encounter that would echo through the entire Pacific campaign. In the next section, we explore this encounter from every perspective, the human, tactical, and technological angles that define the Harder's legend. The human angle inside, a submarine at war. Time bends. Hours stretch into eternities, broken only by alarms, whispers, and the pulse of machinery. The men aboard Harder lived inches from death, and they knew it. The air they breathed was recycled through soda-lime canisters, warm and metallic. Salt from sweat crusted on skin. When the sub went to silent running, no one spoke above a murmur. A dropped wrench could betray them to a destroyer's sonar. Each man carried rituals for luck. A torpedo man rubbed a silver coin before every firing run. The cook crossed himself as he served coffee at dawn. A radio man kept a photo of his wife taped above his station, edges curled from humidity. There was no heroism in the Hollywood sense, only endurance. When depth charges hit, the deck buckled. Dials rattled. Bolts groaned. Water dripped from seams. Men closed their eyes and waited for the next explosion, wondering if the hull would hold. In those moments, even the most disciplined felt the primal terror of drowning in steel. Yet Harder's crew trusted their captain's poise. Commander Dealey never shouted, never hesitated. He would stand at the periscope, hands steady, as if guiding a fragile thread through chaos. One sailor later recalled, "When the old man said, 'Fire 1,' everything inside you went still. You just knew it would hit." That faith was more than morale. It was survival. In the confined, pressure-cooked world of a submarine, psychological cohesion mattered as much as torpedoes. Every patrol fused them tighter. Every brush with death stripped away doubt. By June 1944, Harder's crew operated with near-telepathic precision, each man anticipating the other's move. They had become, in effect, a single living organism made of nerves, steel, and will. 2. The tactical angle naval historians often describe submarine warfare as a contest of geometry and patience. Dealey made it art. His signature move, the down-the-throat shot, defied conventional doctrine. U.S. Navy manuals advised against firing torpedoes head-on at fast-approaching destroyers. The odds of survival were slim. A destroyer's bow profile was small, the closing speed enormous, and a single miscalculation could turn the submarine into a coffin. Dealey reversed that logic. He realized that destroyers, driven by aggression, often charged too directly toward sonar contacts. Their forward momentum left them unable to turn sharply once a submarine fired. By holding his nerve and firing late, he transformed the destroyer's attack run into a fatal trap. At 4,000 yards, a destroyer could cover the distance in under 3 minutes. Dealey waited until less than half that, 1,500, sometimes even 1,000 yards, before releasing a spread of torpedoes. At that range, Japanese sonar operators had seconds to react. Every command had to be perfect. Bearing mark. Range decreasing. Fire 1, fire 2. Then silence. A 3,000-pound warhead moved unseen beneath the surface at 45 knots. The destroyer's helmsman might catch a glimpse of a white wake. Too late. In the cramped control room, Dealey would hold the periscope steady, lips tight, counting seconds in his head. The explosion always came as a dull, delayed thud that rippled through the hull. What followed was chaos above, flares, screams, metal shrieking as ships cracked in half. But below, the submarine remained calm. Orders were issued quietly. Down periscope. Take her deep. Dealey's mastery lay not only in courage, but in timing. He used radar and sonar like extensions of instinct. He understood the rhythm of destroyer searches, how long they'd circle after a depth charge run, when they'd resume patrol, how wide they'd fan out. In battle logs later studied at Subpac headquarters, Dealey's attack patterns showed an uncanny consistency. Engage multiple destroyers in sequence. Exploit their search spacing to isolate targets. Fire minimal torpedo spreads for maximum efficiency. It was controlled audacity, and it worked again and again. In the 96-hour campaign near Sibutu Passage, those principles turned into spectacle. Destroyers that once hunted submarines became victims of their own aggression. Each time they charged, Harder's torpedoes met them mid-rush. Japanese after-action reports captured the disbelief. Enemy submarine displayed suicidal boldness, approached directly and fired under heavy counterattack. What they called suicidal was, in truth, a calculus only a few could master. The technological angle technology in 1944 submarine warfare was both an ally and a curse. The difference between a successful patrol and annihilation often came down to equipment reliability, something that early war submariners couldn't trust. But by the time Harder prowled the Sulu Sea, several breakthroughs had tilted the balance. The first was the Mark 14 torpedo, now finally reliable after years of malfunctions. With depth and detonator fixes, its 600-pound warhead of Torpex explosive could rip a destroyer apart with a single hit. Crews learned to double-check depth settings and remove the faulty magnetic exploders, relying solely on contact detonation. The second was the SJ Surface Search Radar, a rotating mast antenna that could pick up enemy ships far beyond periscope range, even at night or through mist. It allowed Dealey to plan ambushes by predicting the enemy's course before visual contact. The radar officer, hunched over the green glow of the scope, became Dealey's eyes in darkness. Third was the Torpedo Data Computer, TDC, a mechanical, brain-linking periscope readings, gyro angles, and torpedo speeds. Operated flawlessly, it could compute an intercept solution in seconds. On Harder, the TDC operator was as critical as the helmsman. The submarine itself, a Balau class, was an evolution of the earlier Gato design. Its hull, built for 400-foot wide test depth, could survive deeper dives, up to 600 feet in emergencies. That margin saved lives when depth charges fell too close. Even the intangible technologies, sonar discipline, silent running, periscope technique, were honed to near perfection. Dealey's crew had practiced these maneuvers on every prior patrol. They could shift from periscope to silent running in under 10 seconds, a record in the fleet. Yet for all this machinery, success still depended on instinct. Instruments gave data, not wisdom. The ocean's acoustics could deceive. Thermal layers bent sonar signals unpredictably. In the end, it was the human ear, trained and tense, that often caught the faint propeller beat marking the next enemy's approach. Technology amplified courage. It never replaced it. Together, these three angles, human, tactical, and technological, created an equation few navies could solve. A fearless commander, a disciplined crew, and machines finally worthy of their purpose. And in the coming days, that fusion would meet its supreme test. 5 destroyers in 4 nights, each determined to kill the hunter that stalked them. 4. The leadership angle. Commander Samuel D. Dealey. Leadership aboard a submarine is a quiet kind of power. It's measured not in speeches, but in tone of voice. The steadiness that keeps 70 men calm when the hull trembles under pressure. Commander Samuel David Dealey was 38 years old, stocky, even-tempered, and deliberate. He spoke little, but when he did, men listened. He was born in Dallas, Texas, far from the sea, yet he understood the ocean's logic better than most who'd lived beside it. His crew called him Sam Dealey, or the Destroyer Killer, depending on the mood. That second nickname, whispered half in awe, was not self-proclaimed. It was earned the hard way, through battles that tested nerve more than steel. Dealey's method of command combined two opposites: surgical discipline and intuitive risk-taking. He never raised his voice. He issued orders like a metronome, steady, exact. His demeanor transmitted calm even in the most violent moments. His XO once described it this way: you could watch him at the periscope during a depth charge attack, the hull shaking, lights flickering, and he'd still speak as if ordering lunch. But beneath that calm was a willingness to defy fear. Dealey believed submarines had to act offensively, not as ambushers, but as predators. He viewed hesitation as more dangerous than depth charges. During earlier patrols, he had developed an uncanny sense for enemy reactions. He could read a destroyer captained by sonar rhythm, when the screws would reverse, when they'd accelerate. To his men, it seemed like telepathy. In truth, it was long pattern recognition. Hundreds of hours of listening, learning. He demanded much, but gave more. He remembered birthdays, shared cigarettes with machinists, and never blamed anyone for an honest mistake. That humanity bred loyalty so fierce that no man aboard Harder ever refused an order, no matter how suicidal it sounded. Dealey's leadership shaped the crew's moral universe. They didn't fight for medals or strategy. They fought to keep his faith justified. And that bond would soon carry them into one of the most astonishing engagements in submarine history. 5. The enemy angle. The Japanese destroyer. Crews to understand Harder's triumph, one must see the men she fought against. The Imperial Japanese Navy's destroyer force in 1944 was still formidable, seasoned, aggressive, and deadly when well led. Many captains were veterans of the early Pacific victories: Java Sea, Coral Sea, Guadalcanal. Their ships were swift and heavily armed with 5-inch guns and Type 93 long lance torpedoes, capable of devastating any surface target. But by mid-1944, they were fighting against exhaustion and scarcity. Fuel was rationed. Crews were under-trained replacements mixed with veterans. Sonar sets were old and often miscalibrated. The once proud destroyer divisions were stretched thin, escorting convoys across thousands of miles of hostile sea. Worse, Japan's anti-submarine doctrine lagged behind. Its tactics emphasized aggression, charge, drop, and retreat, but lacked the coordinated sonar net and patience that American destroyers later mastered. Once they lost contact, Japanese crews often guessed, dropping charges by instinct, and instincts can be fatal against a commander like Dealey. When the Harder appeared in the Sibutu Passage, She found destroyer captains who underestimated American submariners' willingness to stand and fight. They believed that once detected, a U.S. sub would dive deep and run silent. Dealey reversed the narrative. When attacked, he counterattacked. Japanese after-action reports, later translated, show disbelief at this audacity. One entry read, "Enemy submarine attacked during our pursuit. Fired directly at us from close range. Unthinkable behavior." For the destroyer crews, the psychology was devastating. To be hunted by a submarine was unnerving. To be attacked head-on by one was shattering. Rumors spread across the fleet that a ghost submarine prowled Sibutu, impossible to detect, fearless under fire. Every depth charge run became a test of nerves. Some destroyers began to maneuver erratically, wasting fuel. Others hesitated before closing. The fear was contagious, invisible but real. The Harder's 4-day assault didn't just sink ships. It eroded the enemy's confidence in their own doctrine. That psychological collapse, the fear of an unseen, unstoppable hunter, would ripple through the Japanese fleet weeks later during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The moral and strategic angle, courage, cost and consequence war at sea is an equation of bravery and mathematics. Each kill matters, but each decision exacts a cost that rarely ends with victory. Commander Dealey understood that paradox better than most. He knew every destroyer he sank made Japan's defense weaker, but it also made his own survival less likely. With every attack, the odds tilted toward death. He once told a fellow skipper during refit, "You get one more miracle every patrol. After that, you start borrowing." By his 5th patrol, he was already in debt to fate. Submarine combat, unlike surface warfare, is deeply intimate. You kill people you never see. Men screaming through sonar echoes, ships breaking apart in darkness. Crews felt it. After each engagement, there was silence in the torpedo room. Not celebration, but exhaustion. The morality of their war was pragmatic. Every Japanese destroyer sunk meant fewer American transports attacked, fewer Marines shelled on beaches. It was arithmetic survival, brutal but necessary. Strategically, Dealey's aggression carried immense weight. By crippling destroyer strength near Tawi-Tawi, he influenced timing at the highest level of war. The Japanese mobile fleet, unnerved by submarine reports, departed earlier than planned, moving into the open before coordination was complete. That premature sortie led directly to its catastrophic defeat in the Philippine Sea. One submarine, through a 4-day rampage, had altered the geometry of a major battle thousands of miles wide. But victory's glow always hides a shadow. The cost of such audacity would come soon. In August 1944, during a later patrol near Dassault Bay, Harder was detected and sunk by Japanese depth charges. All hands were lost. Dealey's courage had outlived his luck. History would remember him not for dying, but for redefining how courage looks under pressure. The kind that doesn't roar, but whispers through steel and salt water. The sum of these angles, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and morale, formed the anatomy of what would follow. The 96 hours that stunned Japan's Navy and changed submarine warfare forever. The ocean was poised. The crews were ready, and as dawn broke on June 6, 1944, the hunter and the hunted finally met, June 6, 1944. The first contact before sunrise, the sea lay calm and silver gray. Through the periscope, Commander Dealey watched 3 Japanese destroyers moving south from Tawi-Tawi, their wakes cutting perfect white lines across the glassy water. The nearest was only a few miles away, too far for a sure hit, but close enough to taste the risk. 3 contacts closing fast, reported the radar officer. Speed 25 knots. Dealey's eyes never left the periscope. He gave a slow nod. Battle stations. We'll take the leader. The submarine came alive with whispers and mechanical clicks. Torpedo tube doors opened. Bearings were fed into the TDC. In the control room, the helmsman adjusted course 5 degrees to starboard, just enough to align the periscope crosshairs with the oncoming destroyer's bow. At 200 yards, Dealey's voice cut the tension. Fire 1. Fire 2. 2 torpedoes streaked away, invisible but inevitable. Seconds crawled. Then a thunderous bloom erupted beneath the destroyer's keel. Its bow rose violently. A column of fire licked the dawn sky. Through the scope, Dealey saw men running across a deck that no longer existed. The destroyer, later identified as Minazuki, split in two and vanished within minutes. Her sisters charged in fury, racing over the spot where Harder had fired. "Dive! Take her deep!" Engines roared, ballast tanks hissed, and the sub plunged to 300 feet. Moments later, the first depth charges detonated. The hull flexed and groaned. Light bulbs shattered. Gauges trembled. The sound was like mountains collapsing. But Harder held firm. The crew counted explosions. 20, 40, 60. Each blast rolled through the compartment, knocking tools from shelves and breath from lungs. Men gripped valves to stay upright, salt water seeping through a gasket near the conning tower. When the barrage finally stopped, the sonar operator whispered, "They've lost us." Dealey exhaled softly, then looked at his men. "We'll go back up. They'll send more. He was right." By the time Harder reached periscope depth, another destroyer was sweeping the area. Dealey's instinct said to attack again, but the batteries were low. He let the destroyer pass, marking its bearing for later. In the space of one morning, Harder had done the impossible, destroyed a destroyer head-on, and survived a full counterattack. But it was only the beginning. June 7, 1944. The chase night fell like ink. The submarine surfaced under cloud cover to recharge batteries and ventilate. The diesel engines rumbled, filling the night with oily heat. At 2300 hours, radar picked up another contact, high speed, small signature, bearing north. Dealey identified it immediately, another destroyer patrol from Tawi-Tawi. He ordered flank speed to intercept. The Harder moved on the surface, dark against darker waves. Every man on deck strained his eyes for silhouettes. At 4,000 yards, the radar confirmed multiple pips, a column of destroyers weaving in and out of formation. Dealey's plan was textbook precision. Close the distance silently. Fire a down-the-throat spread at the lead ship. Crash dive immediately at 110 periscope depth. The target loomed ahead, closing fast. The radar mast lowered. Silence returned. Only the hum of motors and the faint heartbeat of sonar pings. Range 1800. Set spread on 2 degrees. Stand by. Fire 1, 2, 3. 3 torpedoes left the tubes in perfect rhythm. 10 seconds. 15. 20. A flash illuminated the horizon. Then another. The destroyer Hayanami vanished in a plume of flame so bright it painted the submarine's interior an eerie orange. 2 hits confirmed, the sonar man reported, his voice shaking, but the other destroyers were already converging. The counterattack came like thunder. For 6 hours, depth charges rained down, some close enough to dent the hull plating. Crewmen stuffed rags into leaking seams. Paint flaked from the ceiling, falling like ash. Dealey stayed motionless, leaning on the periscope handles as if they were the only solid things in the world. He never looked away from his gauges. At dawn, silence again. The enemy was gone. When Harder surfaced hours later to transmit her contact report, the radio operator read the message twice before sending, "2 enemy destroyers sunk. Position off Sibutu. Continuing patrol." The transmission rippled through Allied command channels. Admiral Lockwood's staff at Fremantle read it in disbelief. 5 destroyers in 4 days? He would later write, "I thought it a typographical error." But Dealey wasn't done. He was already plotting the next intercept. June 8, 1944. The third kill. The morning sun burned white over the Sulu Sea. Harder ran submerged. Batteries half-drained, crew exhausted but sharp. Sonar reported distant propeller beats. Rhythmic, deliberate. Dealey studied the sound profile. "That's another one," he murmured. "Fast screws, 30 knots. They're sweeping." He turned the sub north by northeast, moving parallel until the destroyer's course steadied. Then he ordered a slow dive. 200 feet, silent running. Minutes stretched into hours. The contact grew stronger, then fainter, then strong again. The destroyer was zigzagging, a wary hunter. Finally, at 13:20, Dealey raised the periscope. A gray silhouette cut across the horizon, bow foaming, engines pounding. He waited. 2,000 yards, 1,600, 1,200. Fire one! The torpedo streaked away. Then a second, then a third. A minute later, a massive detonation split the sea. The destroyer Tanikaze, one of Japan's seasoned submarine hunters, exploded amidships, its forward magazine erupting in a column of fire. The shockwave shook Harder's hull even from a mile away. In a single salvo, Dealey had eliminated another threat that once terrified submariners. The crew stared at one another in disbelief. Then came a ripple of subdued laughter. Not triumph, but release. For 4 years, Japanese destroyers had been the specter haunting every dive. Now they were the ones dying. Dealey's log entry that day was spare, almost cold. Torpedo hit. Target destroyed. Submerged to avoid counterattack. Above them, oil slicks and debris spread across the sea. The only epitaph for hundreds of enemy sailors. Each day now blurred into the next. Sleep was rationed. Battery levels and air quality became constant concerns. Yet Dealey refused to turn back. He knew what his success meant strategically. Each destroyer sunk forced Japan to divert more ships to escort duty, weakening its offensive strength before the looming Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Harder had become more than a submarine. It was a psychological weapon. Japanese fleet communications were filled with warnings. Enemy submarine extremely aggressive, may attack while under pursuit. Even before the final days of the 96-hour storm, the legend of the Harder had already taken shape, whispered across both navies. By the evening of June 8, 1944, the Harder had destroyed 3 destroyers in less than 72 hours. Yet still radar screens showed more contacts ahead, more destroyers leaving Tawi-Tawi. Dealey's next decision would define his place in naval history. He would not run. He would stay, reload, and face them again. June 9, 1944. The return of the hunters. The fourth dawn rose pale over Sibutu Passage. For the first time in days, the horizon seemed empty. Dealey allowed himself a brief surface run to recharge batteries and take in fresh air. The crew gathered silently on deck, soaking the humid wind, scanning for aircraft. The calm was deceptive. Shortly before noon, radar picked up a small contact, high speed, closing. Another destroyer, likely responding to the previous day's sinkings. Dealey ordered a quick dive to periscope depth. At 1400 hours, the destroyer appeared. Narrow, gray, dagger-shaped. It was the Hiburi, one of Japan's newer escorts. She advanced cautiously, sonar active, her crew surely on edge from the fate of their comrades. Dealey watched through the periscope, the lens trembling slightly with each turn of the propeller. "He's hunting," he said quietly. "We'll help him find something." At 1,800 yards, he fired a single torpedo. The white wake streaked straight toward the destroyer's bow. Seconds later, a direct hit beneath the bridge. The Hiburi erupted in steam and debris. Her forward section disintegrated. Her stern rose before sliding under in less than 2 minutes. The sonar room filled with echoes, collapsing bulkheads, breaking metal, then silence. Dealey lowered the periscope and simply said, "Mark her down. Reload." The Harder drifted beneath the waves as oil slicks spread above. For a moment the crew was silent. Even after so many victories, the human cost pressed on them. Men avoided each other's eyes. They knew hundreds of sailors had just died within earshot. War left no time for reflection. More destroyers were inbound. The depth charge ordeal by nightfall. The Harder's presence was no longer a mystery. Japanese command at Tawi-Tawi issued urgent orders to eliminate the submarine threat. Several destroyers fanned out to hunt. At 1930 hours, sonar picked up fast-moving screws on a collision course. The Harder dived deep, 350 feet, silent running. The first depth charges came seconds later. The explosions were relentless, methodical. Each detonation hammered the hull like a giant's fist. Pipes burst. Lights flickered to red emergency glow. The air turned acrid with fumes and ozone. Dealey ordered the crew to hold trim steady. The men obeyed, faces pale in the dim light. They could feel the steel flex around them, a living thing under torture. For nearly 2 hours the barrage continued. Over 80 charges detonated, shaking the submarine like a drum, but the Harder's hull held. Her crew endured, sweating, praying, and counting. Then, as abruptly as it began, the assault stopped. The destroyers believed the sub destroyed. They drifted away, sonar beams fading into the distance. Dealey exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll give them reason to be sure next time." He had survived one of the most intense anti-submarine hunts of the war, and was preparing to turn the tables again. June 10, 1944. The final duel morning came hot and cloudless. The sea shimmered like polished glass. Dealey stood at the periscope, scanning the horizon. His radar operator whispered, "New contact, 2 destroyers, course 310. Dealey's face didn't change. "Set up for a down the throat." The first destroyer, later identified as Inazuma, raced toward Harder's position, zigzagging but fast, over 30 knots. The second followed close behind, ready to drop charges if the first made contact. At 1,400 yards, Dealey's instincts took over. He fired a single torpedo, a perfect line. The weapon struck Inazuma squarely beneath the bridge. A blinding flash, a shockwave, and then nothing. The destroyer's forward section vanished. The ship's rear end stood upright for a moment before sinking vertically into the depths. The second destroyer turned wildly, firing shells into the empty sea, desperate and blind. Dealey used the chaos. "Bring her up. Let's see if he wants company." Harder broke periscope depth just long enough to acquire a firing angle. 2 torpedoes away. One missed. The destroyer turned hard to port. The second exploded near the stern, crippling her. Smoke billowed across the water. The submarine descended again, undetected, as the second destroyer drifted, engines silent. In 4 days, 5 enemy warships had been destroyed or fatally damaged. The ocean itself seemed stunned into silence. The shockwave far away at Tawi-Tawi, radio reports poured in. Destroyer Minazuki lost. Hayanami missing. Tanikaze sunk. Hibori lost. Inazuma destroyed. Admiral Ozawa's operations staff could scarcely believe it. 5 warships, all in the same sector, all within 96 hours, gone to 1 American submarine. The impact was immediate. The Japanese mobile fleet, fearing further submarine ambushes, abandoned Tawi-Tawi prematurely. Their movement schedule unraveled. Fueling operations were cut short. Coordination between escort groups broke down. This shift would ripple into the upcoming Battle of the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier engagement in history. Historians later traced the altered timetable and its resulting confusion directly to the panic caused by Harder's rampage. Back at Fremantle, the first intercepts of Harder's success reached headquarters. Admiral Lockwood read the decrypted messages and reportedly said, "If true, this is the most brilliant submarine action of the war." He was right. After the storm on board Harder, the atmosphere was surreal. The men were exhausted beyond words. 3 days of near-continuous battle, 200 depth charges, little food or sleep. Yet their discipline never cracked. Dealey, as always, refused to boast. His patrol report was minimal. Engaged enemy destroyers. 5 sunk, numerous depth charges received. Damage to own ship minor. The understatement became legend. That night, Harder surfaced under starlight. The crew gathered on the bridge, breathing cool air, faces smeared with oil and sweat. For the first time, laughter broke out. Quiet, incredulous. One sailor muttered, "No one's gonna believe this." Dealey looked toward the horizon and said softly, "They will when they count what's left." For a moment the sea was calm, vast, indifferent. Then the engines hummed, and Harder slipped back beneath the waves, vanishing into darkness, her work unfinished, her legend sealed. In the days that followed, radio intelligence confirmed that the Japanese fleet had indeed pulled anchor. The domino effect had begun. The Harder's actions, though unseen by the world at the time, had forced Japan's hand and set the stage for one of the decisive naval defeats of the war. For the men who lived through those 96 hours, it was both victory and revelation, proof that courage, skill, and unity could bend the course of history, even from the shadows of the deep. The Harder sailed on into later patrols, but her 96-hour campaign would remain unmatched, a standard of audacity studied by submariners for generations. The guns had fallen silent, but the consequences were only beginning. Next came the reckoning, the strategic and human aftermath of those 4 nights that shook the Pacific. The strategic shockwave. When Harder's patrol report reached Fremantle on June 13, 1944, disbelief ran through the command offices. 5 Japanese destroyers sunk in less than 4 days by a single submarine seemed implausible. Admiral Charles Lockwood read the decrypted transmission twice before forwarding it to Pearl Harbor with a single remark: "If confirmed, this patrol will stand alone." Confirmation arrived within days. Japanese naval records, later cross-checked with intercepted radio traffic, listed the destroyers Minazuki, Hayanami, Tanikaze, Hibori, and Inazuma as lost or missing in the Sibutu area between June 6 and June 10. The pattern matched Harder's attack log almost exactly. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, it was not merely the loss of ships, it was the loss of time. Each destroyer represented fuel escorts, carrier screens, and anti-submarine patrols. Their destruction created a vacuum in Japan's defensive net, forcing commanders to reshuffle remaining escorts to fill the gaps. This crippled coordination, just as Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet prepared to sail for the Marianas. As a result, refueling schedules were rushed. Ships left Tawi-Tawi without full tanks. Escort groups departed piecemeal, scattered instead of unified. When the fleet reached the Philippine Sea later that month, it was already exhausted, uncoordinated, and blind to the threat that awaited. Historians now agree the Harder's 4-day campaign contributed directly to Japan's disarray during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier engagement in history and a crushing defeat that destroyed Japan's naval air power forever. The hunter from the deep had shifted the tempo of a war spanning half the globe. Impact on the U.S. submarine force within Submarine Force Pacific, SubPac. Harder's success became legend almost overnight. Admiral Lockwood issued a message to all commands. The Harder's attack near Sibutu Passage stands as an example of offensive spirit and cool courage. Well done to Dealey and crew. In war rooms and briefing huts, instructors began adding the Dealey method to their lectures, the concept of aggressive counterattack, of turning defense into offense underwater. His down-the-throat tactics, once considered reckless, were now studied as a legitimate doctrine. The psychological impact on American submariners was immense. Through 1942 and 1943, they had endured years of frustration, faulty torpedoes, cautious policies, heavy losses, but now they had proof that one skilled crew, in one submarine, could strike fear into an entire fleet. At Fremantle, Harder's crew returned to a hero's welcome. Photos from June 1944 show sunburned sailors stepping ashore, uniforms wrinkled, faces hollow with fatigue but alive. Dealey was greeted by Lockwood himself, who clasped his shoulder and said quietly, "You've done more than sink ships. You've lifted an entire service." Behind those words lay grim arithmetic. Every success carried its price. Each submarine averaged only a few patrols before being lost. Everyone at Fremantle knew that no streak lasted forever. The crew's reality inside Harder. The mood after the rampage was complex, pride mixed with silence. Few men spoke of what they'd seen. Submarine warfare is uniquely intimate. The victims invisible, but their deaths immediate and undeniable. Each explosion they caused echoed through the hull like a heartbeat. The sonar operators could hear the tearing metal, the collapsing bulkheads, the sudden stop of propeller beats. They knew exactly when a ship, and everyone aboard it, ceased to exist. Torpedo men often stayed behind in the dim torpedo room after an engagement, checking equipment with trembling hands. Some prayed, others smoked in silence. Dealey never gave speeches or congratulations. He simply thanked his crew quietly and ordered the next dive. That restraint kept the men grounded. In his log, one sailor later wrote, "We were proud, but it didn't feel like glory. It felt like doing what we had to." The submarine's air filters couldn't keep up with the tropical humidity. Mold grew on bunk curtains. Fresh water was rationed. Every man smelled of diesel, salt, and nerves. Yet morale remained unbroken, because their captain never faltered. In the wardroom after the fifth destroyer's sinking, Dealey reportedly said only one sentence before dismissing his officers. "That's 5. Let's make sure we live to tell them." The Japanese side at Tawi-Tawi, the news hit like thunder. Destroyer captains gathered in disbelief as casualty reports arrived one after another. Some officers refused to believe the sinkings were all caused by a single submarine. Others blamed bad sonar calibration or unlucky weather. Admiral Ozawa's staff issued new anti-submarine orders. Tighter screening formations, longer search patterns, depth charge patterns doubled. But morale among destroyer crews collapsed. The once feared hunters now moved cautiously, afraid of phantom torpedoes in every ripple. Japanese intelligence even speculated that the Americans had deployed multiple submarines in the Sibutu Passage, operating under a single call sign. They could not accept that one vessel, Harder, had done it alone. In a post-war interview, a Japanese officer from the Tawi-Tawi base admitted, "We began to believe there was a special submarine. Impossible to catch, impossible to stop." The men called it the Devil Boat. The Devil Boat myth spread faster than any confirmed report. Fear at sea is a contagion, and Harder became its vector. The immediate consequence. Within days of the Sibutu attacks, the Japanese mobile fleet began moving north toward the Marianas. Their departure was rushed and chaotic. Destroyer formations incomplete, refueling disrupted, escort numbers reduced. This premature movement placed Ozawa's carriers exactly where Admiral Raymond Spruance wanted them, exposed and underpowered in open waters. When the Battle of the Philippine Sea erupted between June 19 and 20, Japanese aircraft met the full weight of American naval aviation. In those 2 days, Japan lost over 400 carrier planes, a catastrophe so total that surviving U.S. pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. While Harder fought unseen hundreds of miles away, her shadow lay across that victory. Every destroyer she sank, every patrol she disrupted, had weakened the enemy's ability to fight that decisive battle. Few of Harder's men would live to hear it, but in war's grand calculus, their 96-hour campaign helped decide who controlled the Pacific. Return to Fremantle. When Harder finally returned to port on July 3, 1944, she had been at sea for nearly 6 weeks. The submarine slid alongside the pier at Fremantle, her paint scarred, her hull dented from depth charges. Crewmen emerged blinking into the sunlight. Medical officers took their pulse rates, abnormally high after prolonged tension. Reporters snapped photographs. But there were no speeches, no cheering crowds. Only the soft clatter of dock workers and the quiet nods of other submarine crews who understood what had been accomplished. Dealey filed his final patrol report that evening. In his handwriting, neat and unhurried, he wrote, "Enemy losses verified. Morale of crew excellent, ship seaworthy. Request permission to refit and return to patrol area." He was already thinking ahead. One more mission, one more chance to press the advantage. The world now knew the name Harder, but the story was not over. Ahead lay her final voyage, and the fate that would make her legend eternal. The final patrol, USS Harder's 5th patrol, ended in triumph. Her sixth began in silence. After a brief refit and rest at Fremantle, Commander Samuel Dealey received orders for another mission, this time to operate off Luzon in the northern Philippines, in coordination with USS Harder and USS Hake. The goal was the same as before: attack Japanese coastal convoys, disrupt reinforcement routes, and keep pressure on the collapsing supply lines of the Pacific. The crew knew the odds. Submarine losses were mounting in mid-1944. The deeper the U.S. fleet pushed toward Japan, the tighter enemy patrol lines became. The Harder had survived 5 war patrols already, each one a miracle. Before departure, Dealey walked the pier one last time. He shook hands with Admiral Lockwood, who urged him to take care. The commander's reply was quiet, characteristic. "We'll make it count, sir." On August 27, 1944, Harder rendezvoused with Hake and Harder off western Luzon. The 3 submarines shared radar contact data and planned a night surface sweep of Dasol Bay, a small inlet frequently used by Japanese anti-submarine craft. For 2 days, the seas were calm and uneventful. Then at dawn on August 24th, radar detected 2 Japanese escort ships entering the bay. Dealey ordered Harder into position. He had done this hundreds of times, methodically, confidently. The crew moved like clockwork. At 07:28, Hake, operating nearby, recorded sonar explosions. 5 rapid, heavy detonations. Moments later, a plume of debris broke the surface. Then nothing. Harder never answered the next radio check. Japanese records later revealed that the escort CD-22 had made a sonar contact and dropped a precise pattern of depth charges. The second salvo detonated almost directly above the submarine. The Harder was gone. 79 men, including Commander Dealey, were lost with her, entombed 300 feet beneath the South China Sea. The reaction: when Harder failed to report by the end of August, Fremantle's command suspected the worst. Admiral Lockwood wrote in his diary, "Dealey overdue, no word. Hope remains, but not much." Weeks later, Japanese records confirmed her sinking. The news spread quietly among the submarine force. There were no public announcements at first, no headlines. Among submariners, silence was the highest form of respect. Lockwood later wrote to Dealey's wife, Edwina, "Your husband's gallantry and leadership will be remembered as long as there is a United States Navy." She received the letter with their 4 children by her side. The youngest was only 2. Recognition and legacy posthumously. Commander Samuel D. Dealey was awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during the 5th Patrol, the 96-hour campaign in the Sibutu Passage. The citation read, in part, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy destroyers, sinking 5 ships in 4 days, and inspiring his men to unparalleled performance of duty. It was the highest decoration an American sailor could receive, and one that Dealey himself would likely have." Deflected with modesty, the Harder also received the Presidential Unit Citation for her series of victories, recognized as one of the most successful patrols in submarine history. Naval historians later ranked her among the most decorated boats of World War II. Her record stood at 20 enemy ships sunk or damaged, including the 5 destroyers that gave her the title Destroyer Killer, but medals and citations could not fill the void she left behind. Every submarine base in the Pacific felt her absence. Crews spoke of her in reverent tones. Some men wore small black armbands for weeks. Others pinned her patch to the inside of their lockers before departing on patrol. The grave beneath the sea for decades, the Harder's resting place remained unknown. Wartime coordinates were imprecise, and the sea off Luzon was deep and unpredictable. It wasn't until much later, using declassified records and sonar surveys, that her approximate site was confirmed near Dasol Bay, roughly 300 feet down. Divers never attempted recovery. The wreck was declared a war grave, protected by international maritime law. 79 sailors still rest within her steel hull, sealed forever in the position where she made her last dive. Every few years, U.S. Navy submarines passing through the region send a brief coded salute over the same frequency band she once used, a tradition that continues quietly to this day. One such message, logged in 1970, read simply, "To the Harder and her crew. You showed us how." The historical legacy. The Harder's story endures not only because of her victories, but because of what they represented: the transformation of submarine warfare from desperate survival to calculated dominance. Her 96-hour campaign is now studied at the U.S. Naval War College as a model of tactical innovation under pressure. Dealey's use of radar and TDC coordination, his instinct for timing, and his willingness to engage superior forces head-on all redefined what a submarine could achieve. In the Pacific War's broader arc, Harder's actions proved a turning point in undersea doctrine. Aggression, once discouraged, became the standard. Commanders were trained to seize initiative, to strike first, not wait. The Japanese destroyer fleet, once the terror of submarine crews, never recovered from the psychological blow. Survivors of the Sibutu campaign spoke of the invisible wolf, a foe that fought without hesitation and vanished without trace. A legacy of men beyond strategy and machines, the Harder's story is one of human devotion. 79 lives intertwined by courage, trust, and purpose. The men who served under Dealey were ordinary Americans, machinists from Ohio, farm boys from Texas, radio operators from New York, a cook from Alabama. They shared one small, stifling world beneath the waves, and gave everything to each other. Their names are engraved on the marble walls of the Manila American Cemetery and the USS Bowfin Submarine Museum in Pearl Harbor. Visitors run their fingers across those carved letters, often stopping at one word repeated through the decades: Harder. Dealey's Medal of Honor rests today in a museum in Dallas, displayed beside a photo of the man himself, calm, unpretentious, eyes steady. Beneath it, a plaque bears the Navy's own epitaph: "He led from silence, and the sea remembers." The ripples that never faded. By the war's end in 1945, American submarines had destroyed over 1,300 Japanese ships, 55% of Japan's total maritime losses. Much of that effectiveness traced back to commanders like Dealey, who proved what was possible beneath the waves. Even decades later, in the nuclear age of submarines and sonar arrays, sailors still speak of the Harder with quiet respect. In training briefings, her name appears beside a single line: aggression tempered by precision, the Dealey way. No submarine has ever repeated her feat of 5 destroyers in 4 days. None likely ever will. The Harder may lie silent under layers of sand and coral, but her story still moves through every undersea vessel that bears the American flag. For those who go down to the sea in steel, her spirit is not gone, only waiting, deep beneath the waves, where courage is measured in silence. The water closes, the guns cool, but the meaning of those 4 days continues to echo. In strategy, in memory, in the quiet hum of engines beneath the Pacific, the sea does not keep score. It buries the wrecks, softens the scars, and carries on. Silent, infinite, indifferent. But sometimes, beneath that silence, history breathes. In June 1944, in a narrow stretch of ocean between the Philippines and Borneo, 1 submarine and 79 men changed the tempo of a war. They did it not with superior numbers or overwhelming force, but with precision, patience, and an unshakable belief in each other. For 4 days and nights, USS Harder fought a war of nerves against Japan's finest destroyers. Every torpedo fired, every maneuver executed, was a gamble against physics and fate. And every time, the men inside that pressure hull proved that skill and courage could tip the balance of an empire. Historians often measure victory in tonnage sunk or fleets destroyed. But Harder's legacy is measured differently, in proof. Proof that aggression could coexist with intellect. Proof that human calm could master chaos. proof that a handful of men could reshape the psychology of an enemy nation. In a world consumed by total war, their 96-hour stand in Sibutu Passage was more than a string of attacks. It was a lesson in leadership under absolute pressure. Commander Samuel Dealey didn't merely command a submarine, he conducted it, like an orchestra beneath the waves. His calm became the rhythm his men lived by. When others fled, he closed the distance. When doctrine said evade, he attacked. And in doing so, he revealed something timeless, that the sea, vast and merciless, still bends to those who understand it completely. The nature of courage. Courage in war is often misunderstood. It isn't reckless or loud. It doesn't live in speeches or banners. Real courage is quiet. It's the moment before the order, the breath between fear and decision. Inside Harder, courage sounded like whispered bearings and the metallic hiss of torpedo tubes flooding. It looked like men holding still while explosions walked across the hull. It felt like trusting one man's voice in the dark. Dealey's kind of bravery was not theatrical. It was mathematical, measured in seconds, distances, and probabilities. Every order carried a weight of calculation and conscience. He knew what each risk meant. He took them anyway. And yet beneath that calculation was something profoundly human. Belief. Belief that if his men did their jobs perfectly, if every bearing, every gyro angle, every valve was correct, they could survive the impossible. That belief outlived him. It became doctrine. Echoes. Through time. 80 years later, submarines no longer fight with periscopes and manual TDCs. They use satellites, digital targeting, and sonar arrays that can read the sea like a map. But in every modern submarine, in every control room lit by the glow of instruments, the lessons of Harder remain. Her story is taught not as legend, but as lineage, a reminder that no amount of technology can replace the human factor, the judgment, instinct, and composure that define great command. Every generation of submariners inherits two traditions: silence and memory. They operate unseen, speak rarely, and remember always. Among those memories, the name Harder holds a special gravity. Because beneath every calculation, every dive order, every whispered "Fire 1," there lies the echo of that 4-day storm. Satam, proof that perfection under pressure is not myth, but muscle memory written by those who dared first. The weight of the deep. At Dassault Bay, 300 feet below the surface, the Pacific holds what remains of the Harder. No divers disturb her. No light reaches her. Only the slow drift of currents and the soft touch of silt over steel. Yet for sailors who pass above, she is not lost. She is presence, unseen but felt. They know she lies there, not as a grave, but as a promise kept. A promise that courage leaves traces the ocean cannot erase. Every few years, a passing submarine transmits a brief coded salute on her old frequencies. The message never changes. To the Harder and her crew, still on patrol. That phrase carries no superstition, only respect. It reminds every sailor that history's true monuments are not carved in stone, but in endurance, in the quiet courage of those who faced pressure, both literal and moral, and did not yield. What it meant, in the scale of global war, the Harder's 96 hours might seem small, 5 destroyers in an ocean of battles. But wars are not changed only by numbers. They are changed by moments that reveal what men are capable of. The Harder's stand was one of those moments, when fear became discipline, and discipline became history. She forced an enemy fleet to alter its plans, contributed to a decisive victory, and redefined submarine warfare. But beyond strategy, her story endures because it reminds us that even in war's darkest machinery, there is still room for clarity, precision, and grace. When we look back at that narrow passage between Sibutu and Borneo, it is not the explosions we remember, but the stillness before them. the calm command of a man who trusted his crew, and the silent faith of 79 souls who followed him into the deep. The final image. Imagine the Sibutu Passage today. The water is clear, the reefs alive with color. Sunlight filters down in shifting ribbons. Somewhere below, under sand and coral, lies a shape of rusted steel. Quiet, intact, eternal. The ocean has reclaimed her, but the story she left behind continues to surface, in classrooms, in memorials, in the whispered pride of submariners who still say her name with a hint of awe. In the end, USS Harder did not simply sink ships. She sank doubt, the belief that caution is safer than conviction. Her 96-hour storm reminds us that history's greatest acts of courage are often invisible, silent, and sealed beneath the sea. Japan couldn't believe it, the reports once said. Neither could anyone else, until the records proved it true. 1 submarine, 4 days, 5 destroyers, and a legacy that refuses to fade, even as the waves close over the place where she sleeps. If this story moved you, if the courage of the USS Harder and her crew deserves to be remembered, help their legacy reach more people. Like the men who stood watch beneath the waves, every story like this survives only when it's passed forward. Subscribe for more untold WAT missions. Turn on notifications. New documentaries every week. Comment below, should we tell the story of another lost submarine next?